The Ministry of Education and Sports shares the concerns of the public about the unrealistic and high school fees charges, which are denying access to basic and secondary education for a number of learners. Hence, this is compromising the government objective of providing affordable quality education for all and increasing equitable access to primary and post-primary education. It's against this background, ladies and gentlemen, that the First Lady, Minister of Education and Sports, set up a committee chaired by Professor Kayanja, then in March 2017. The objectives of the committee included to establish the current then fee structures for government and private schools, and to find out the cost triggers for the escalating fees and proposal of any other messages necessary in the management of fees and recommendation for controlling the escalation of fees. The findings and the recommendation of the committee were considered and the guidelines were issued while taking into consideration the liberalized nature of the economy and the consequent need for government to regulate rather than control levels of fees by designing guidelines, which schools must abide by. In the long term, the basis for the guideline for fee structure should be the unit cost for each category of education. From the recommendations then that were drawn from the Kayanja's report, the Ministry of Education came up with measures to curb the continuous rising of school charges. These measures were communicated to the schools and the public as well through press release. Then a circular was released to the schools by the permanent secretary. The circulars were issued on 24th October 2017, and it was reissued on 27th October 2018. In the short-term recommendation, all government and government-aided schools was that they must subscribe to the fee structure proposed in the report, where an annual increase should not exceed 5% of the current charges. The guidelines in the circular included the following. 1. No school, private or government, shall increase school fees for whatever reasons without written authorization from the permanent secretary, Ministry of Education and Sports in case of secondary schools, and the Chief Administrative Officer or the Town Clerk in case of primary education, as the case may be. And the action taken there that time was increment of school fees was approved by then for 7 schools in 2018 and 4 schools in 2019. And 2 schools were left pending the approval by that time. The second recommendation, other cash and non-cash requirements outside the approved school structure are strictly prohibited. All non-cash items must be catered for in the school budget. Number 3, schools implementing universal primary education, universal secondary education, and universal post-O-level and training shall strictly adhere to the policy implementation guidelines, where parents decide and agree to contribute towards an emergency in the school and permission is sought and granted by the permanent secretary. No learner shall be excluded from school on account of parents' failure to pay the agreed amount in accordance with Section 9 of the Education Act of 2008. As soon as the emergency is solved, the school shall not charging the emergency fund. Number 4, when a school board or school management committee has to employ additional teachers to those on payrolls, permission shall be sought from the permanent secretary in case of secondary schools and chief administrative officer or town clerk in case of primary schools to use part of the capitation grants towards the payment of the additional teachers. Number 5, in line with the above in number 4, head teachers are warned against employing additional teachers before all teachers on payroll have been assigned the minimum requirement teaching load. All teachers without a minimum teaching load should be promptly reported to the Ministry of Education and Sports in the case of secondary school, and for the primary school to the local government. All schools must respect staff establishment ceilings for both teaching and non-teaching staff as provided by the Ministry of Public Service. Number 6, private schools must adhere to the approved start employment guideline. They should formally recruit, contract, and effectively manage and develop staff on reasonable employment terms. Number 7, all government and government-aided schools should desist from taking commercial loans. Any school applying for a loan must seek authorization from the permanent secretary and Minister of Finance through the permanent secretary, Ministry of Education and Sport, as provided for in the Public Financial Management Act 2015. These schools must desist from charging their status to boarding until such a time when the change in status is approved by the permanent secretary, Ministry of Education and Sports. These schools who desire to operate for boardings or hostels should seek permission from the permanent secretary. Several local governments from that guideline closed all the illegal schools and the boarding facilities. And that time before COVID, that has been an ongoing campaign. So the guidelines have been really widely circulated to all local government. So ladies and gentlemen, in line with the guideline that was issued by the First Lady earlier on, that was about schools should maintain fees as of Term 1, 2020. The initial guideline has also been issued by the permanent secretary on the 15th of December, and through a circular that was sent to all schools about charges of school fees. And for that matter, the ministry has taken note of schools, especially boarding secondary schools, that has increased fees top up in total defiance of the directive issued by the Ministry of Education and Sports, contrary to the guideline. We are today making this statement for the public that already actions have been taken in line with arbitrary increment in school fees. The directive has been directed to the chair of board, governors, chair of school management committee as one. The directive issued by the Minister of Education and Sports as part of school reopening that all schools maintain the school fees at the level of Term 1, 2020 must be adhered to. 2, for schools where the parents have already paid the top-up fees, the charges would be rolled over to the subsequent terms in academic year 2020. 2, as prepaid fees for the next term. The head teachers are required to effectively issue a circular to all parents communicating the new development in any case not later than 17th January. Number 3, all head teachers of schools charging top-up fees are required to conduct Board of Governors special meeting to review the budget estimates and to put a work plan that is accordingly. Number 4, all schools must within the first 6 weeks from the date of reopening convene a parents' general meeting to discuss the standard operating procedures and the fee structure for term 2 and term 3 immediately. 5, head teachers are reminded to reprioritize their expenditure, especially for term 1, and to stay the implementation, stay put the capital development projects. And lastly, schools that have specific and unique issues relating to fees charges are required to follow the procedures that have been laid down as prescribed earlier in the communications that was sent prior. As I conclude, this has been the directive taken and issued to all schools, management committee, the head teachers, the board, all the district leadership, and to be informed that the head teachers' failure to observe guidelines given in this circular, we will hold the head teachers personally responsible for any eventuality arising from their lack of taking action. As I conclude, we appeal to all public and all our stakeholders to join us, to join the Ministry of Education, to sensitize our communities, the Board of Governors, the School Management Committee on these guidelines. The ministry is also requesting the public to alert our ministry of any school or institutions that has blotched the following guidelines so that we can put strong disciplinary action against these institutions for God and my country.